Hi, everyone. So I got the go-ahead to start. So if you could make your way to the table, sit down when you get a chance, and we'll have the next talk coming up soon. All right. So I'm really excited to be here today. And thanks for coming to my talk, Stranger Danger, Finding Security Vulnerabilities Before They Find You. And to kick things off, I want to tell you a little bit about me. My name is Hayley Denbraver, and you can find me at Hayley Denbraver or Hayley Denby on Twitter. And I'm a developer advocate at Snyk. And Snyk is really excited to be here today. We're one of the sponsors. So if what I say is interesting, come talk to us. We'd love to show you some more. So I'm a developer advocate at Snyk, and I find that sometimes people haven't encountered that title before. And so just to give you some background, I write some code, but I also do a lot of speaking, writing, like not code, but just words. And I also do a bit of teaching. And, at Snyk, we are very security focused. So we chose this Doberman for our logo because he's intimidating. And we have a lot of, really intense security people, but my job as a developer advocate is really more along the lines of this golden retriever, where I try to be friendly, approachable, helpful. I want to hear from the community. So if you ever want to talk open source and security, I would love to hear from you. And you can find me on Twitter, and I'll have my email at the end of the slides. So I want to talk to you guys a bit about open source. And at Snyk, and just personally, we think open source is awesome, right? It's so much of what is cool in the tech world right now. And it's really nice not to have to reinvent the wheel. It's a source of collaboration and creativity, and it has a really strong future. And in fact, open source, its usage has exploded. Who here works for a company that uses open source? Yeah. So most people. And did anyone here learn to code in a proprietary language? No, just me. But there's just a world of possibilities that opened up for me when I was introduced to open source, and we're committed to keeping it as healthy as it possibly can be. And where we're focused is on security. And I want to emphasize that open source software, it's created and maintained by usually communities of volunteers, by people who have shared their work freely. And I think there's an assumption when we use software that we trust it. And I think people have the best intentions, but open source software isn't necessarily secure. Our industry likes to move fast, and security takes time. Even though we love open source and have embraced it, we need to consider how to use it in the best way. So we stay secure and we protect our clients and users. I do want to note, though, that many maintainers do take security very seriously, and we really appreciate their efforts. So open source doesn't necessarily equal insecure either. It's just an unknown, and with an unknown, there's a risk, and you do what you can to mitigate it, right? And I want to define the risk a little bit, right? What are we talking about with security vulnerabilities and open source software? Well, open source software is an attractive target. Attackers are targeting open source software. You have one vulnerability, but you have many, many potential victims, right? Because we're using and sharing the same software. A single vulnerability can lead you to many victims, and it's a high return on investment for someone seeking to do harm. A lot of vulnerabilities are known, and so the attacker doesn't even need to find a vulnerability themselves. They just need to know the database to look up those vulnerabilities. And these vulnerabilities are in versions that are still widely used because devs aren't the best at keeping our packages up to date. So let's talk about a few real-world examples. Who here has heard of Heartbleed? Yeah. So the Heartbleed bug was a serious vulnerability in the popular OpenSSL cryptographic software library. The vulnerability allowed the stealing of information under just normal conditions by the SSL and TLS encryption used to secure the internet. And attacks occurred over web, email, instant messaging, VPNs, and that kind of thing. So this was a widely, or it impacted a number of people, right? And then who here has heard of shell shock? Yeah. So this was a 2014 vulnerability that impacted Linux, Unix, and Mac OS X operating systems. And it was a remote code execution vulnerability. So code could be run on your machine given certain conditions, and that code could be malicious, right? This is another real-world example. Logjam was a vulnerability that it was a problem with a key exchange cryptographic algorithm, and basically you could compromise the key, and that secure connection could be a problem. And then, of course, the struts vulnerability that led to the Equifax breach in 2017. So these vulnerabilities made the news, and we learned about them, and we know about them, but is this a problem for our standard packages? Is it something every company needs to consider? Well, there was a recent study that showed that 30% of Docker Hub images carry known vulnerabilities. And this stat is actually related to high priority known vulnerabilities. And that's OSS binaries, but what about packages? And unfortunately, those are also hacker friendly. There are known vulnerabilities, and new ones are found all the time. Packages are widely used, so there's a number of potential victims, and it's hard to keep up to date. And all of this boils down to open source vulnerabilities being a high return on investment for someone looking to do damage. And the next couple of slides are going to help us understand why exactly this opportunity is attractive to hackers. So let's consider that this circle represents your entire application. This is everything that's on production. How much of this circle actually represents the code that you personally wrote? Any guesses? On a good day, it would be half. It actually, this is a visual representation, but it probably looks something more like this. And the code that you write, it really is a small part of the code that's running in production. And I know this is a visual example, so I also have some projects and some numbers for you, so you can just see how much of your code isn't really yours. So this is an example where this code will fetch and store a file in S3. And this is a serverless framework example. So this program, it's very lightweight, 23 lines of code written by the person producing this software. How many dependencies, open source dependencies, do you think? Any guesses? 85. Well, so this one has 2 direct dependencies. So it's dependent on the AWS SDK and on Node Fetch. But when you install an open source dependency, you actually install more than just that dependency. Each of those dependencies that you install also has a tree of dependencies under it. So we directly installed 2, but how many total dependencies do you think we have? Any guesses? We have, this time, we actually have 19 total dependencies, right? And if you didn't, so that's 17 that you didn't purposefully set out to install, which means that you probably haven't considered the health of those packages, right? Or maybe you have, but it's just another unknown, right? And these packages, I'm going to give you a spoiler, they include a lot more lines of code than 19. In fact, they include nearly 200,000 lines of code. Okay, so this is just a much bigger surface area for someone to find a vulnerability, something that's not really up to scratch, and hack into your system, right? Here is another example. This is a Java to-do list, basically, a to-do list made with Java. And it has 222 lines of code. Now this one, this is a little dependency tree that Snyk built out. And it has 5 direct dependencies. How many indirect dependencies do you think we may have? We're going to have 54 here. And for these 222 lines of code that you wrote, you're incorporating nearly 500,000 lines of open source code. So that little dot earlier in the slideshow, it really is it can be very, very small compared to the open source code that you're using. And sometimes this surprises people, and the first thing they ask is, how do I protect myself? And it may be possible to do a security review of the code that I wrote, those 222 lines, those 19 lines. But how am I supposed to evaluate 500,000 lines of code that were written by people you probably don't even know? And it's a really good question. But I want to start with a slightly different one and see where we can go from there. And the question I want to ask is, what can I learn from the known open source vulnerabilities? And this is where we're going to do a tiny bit of live hacking. And we're going to do so with the help of my cat, believe it or not. Let's see. I have a sample app for you, and I'm going to pull it up. Oh, no. Oh, okay, it's there. So this is my cat, Jacques, and he is really bossy. And he's made a to-do app for me, where he can go and he can submit all the things he needs me to do, and it doesn't matter that I weigh several times more than him and am supposedly smarter, he's still gonna boss me around, right? And this app is attached to my Snyk account. And so we're gonna be taking a look at the vulnerabilities that are in this app. And it is also open source. Snyk has a number of libraries with purposefully buggy open source dependencies, and they're open, they're public repos, and you can fork them and try these things for yourself if you want to, right? So I forked the serverless Goof app, but we also have just a normal Node app, we have a Java app, And you can fork these and try them yourselves. So we're going to be looking through some of these things. Let me see. There's the app. That's not important. There's Snyk. And, okay, yeah. I'm going to pull up my terminal. And my notes. So if Jacques wanted to add something, okay, that's still up, even though that one's not. All right. So Jacques is almost always hungry. So he's going to add feed cat to the to-do list. And I have pre-populated a curl statement that is going to hit this serverless function to do create, and it has the data feed cat. Right? So I'm going to hit that. Is my internet? Okay, there it goes. So now when we check the application, we have feed cat. So he has bossed me around effectively. But I don't really appreciate this, right? I'm bigger, I'm stronger, I'm smarter. And I'm going to hack this app so he can't boss me around anymore. So how might I do that? Well, if we look at, so this is the Snyk. I've added this project to Snyk, and we have a number of vulnerabilities that were found, including some high severity vulnerabilities, some medium, and some low. And there's a number of different types of vulnerabilities, but the one that I'm going to take advantage of is called a regular expression denial of service. Has anyone here heard of that or encountered it? Yeah. So basically, if the open source library uses regex and doesn't handle certain conditions very well, it can just kind of stall while it tries to match something that's going to take a really long time to match. So I believe that's a medium severity. Let's find it. So we have some cross-site scripting going on, denial of service. Oh, maybe it was high. Well, so can I get a sense of what you all do? Do we have, who here has developer or engineer in your title? Okay. The rest of you, are you like your company's security person? Any other titles out there? Yeah. So, if you're not directly a developer, maybe this is something you can show to your team to kind of get them thinking about security. So we have this regular expression denial of service, and it's in the vulnerable module MS. And it was introduced through this version, right? And MS is a millisecond conversion utility, and it's vulnerable to regular expression denial of service because it'll keep trying to match forever and ever, and we're gonna exploit that. So if I wanted, I'll show you how it works first, and maybe Jacques, he wants to be woken up in 2 days because that's all he does is sleep. And so I have a curl command here, and I'm creating another to-do item, and the text is to wake cat in 2 days. Okay, so let's add that to our app. And we will see it here. No. Sorry about that. I think it's under render. So it recognized 2 days as a unit of time. So that's what you see here, this 2 days. And I could build some functionality in where it would remind me, or something like that, when this is due, right? So this is kind of why we want the MS module in our app. But this is what it looks like working correctly, right? But maybe Jacques wants treats, wants snacks in a few minutes. So I can use a regular expression. And this particular one, it's going to be able to match pretty quickly. And see, you know, I'm gonna clear this and make it a little bit bigger for you guys. All right, so this includes a regular expression, and I'm trying to give a time parameter to when I'm going to feed Jacques some snacks, right? And it's going to take a second or two to match, but it'll go through. But what if we purposefully fed it something that looks a little weird, right? What if we fed it something like this same item, but we're going to misspell minutes? So we're trying to say we'll feed him some snacks in minute-y, which isn't a thing, and it's going to confuse it. But, oh, you know what? I have a funny quotation mark there. Sorry about that. See if this works. All right, so I fed it a slightly different one, and it is now trying to do some matching over quite a number of characters and trying to look for minute-y, and it is just hanging there, right? And if I go to my application, this was the previous provide snacks. I guess it did go through. But we can go back to here, and it's just still hanging. So now I've effectively stopped Jacques from being able to add any additional items to this list. So I'm feeling pretty good about myself, but I'm not necessarily feeling good about the health of my open source dependencies, right? because this wasn't a terribly difficult thing to do, right? And this is all public, right? There is a public repo where I could look this up, find this exploit, and if I guess or have some reason to believe that someone is using this module, I can, stop it in its tracks. Just not very hard at all. So I'm going to go back to our presentation and talk a little bit more, kind of wrap some things up. Where did... Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so Jacques was thwarted, but how do we prevent attacks like this from happening to your applications, which are undoubtedly more serious and professionally consequential than this weird to-do app that I had for my cat? Oh no. All right, so here's the things that I want you to take away about open source software packages. First, it's important to be able to find the vulnerabilities. You need to test all of your applications because if they use open source, they're vulnerable. And once you find them, you want to be able to fix it, right? And this usually involves an upgrade or a patch. There might not be something available right away, but the sooner you adopt whatever fix is made, just the less likely you are to have a problem with that particular vulnerability. We also want to prevent you from adding a vulnerable module. So if you're adding a new open source dependency to your project, it would probably be good to understand what's in there as you're adding it so you can make an informed decision as to whether it's a good choice for your project. And you can find and fix these problems before they end up in production, right? And finally, we want to respond quickly to new vulnerabilities. There are a number of public databases that you can keep your eye on, or you can use Snyk, and that's a shameless plug, but it's really easy to use, and we have a free tier, right? So what is the solution to these problems? How do we respond when we encounter this? How do we build a culture where these things can be addressed well? And there are three things I really think contribute to making this all actionable. And the first is team culture, the second is process, and the third is tooling. Team culture includes things like having a blameless perspective. Team members need to know that they can raise concerns or security issues with you without some kind of retaliation or blame being assigned, right? It's more important to know than to punish someone for making an oversight in the past, right? So having an open, blameless perspective like that can really help. Another thing I would say is having a team where learning is both fostered and normalized is really great to creating a team that's continuously learning, continuously improving. We all start somewhere with security, but there's always somewhere to go, right? So even if this is new and your team is learning, give them a few steps that they can take right now and continue that process, and incrementally you'll become better, right? So process involves a few different things. It involves how you bring security into your workflow, how it's practically dealt with day to day. Who's thinking about security? When are they thinking about it? How are decisions made about what dependencies are included, and when are upgrades scheduled? Are they prioritized? Are they on the calendar? Are they on the roadmap, right? And tooling can actually help a lot with the process. This is actually why Snyk exists. We want to meet developers where they are and integrate with the technologies and the tools that you're using. Because if security is a seamless part of your workflow, then it's more likely to happen, changes are more likely to be made, issues are less likely to be swept under the rug, that kind of thing, if it's just a natural part of your process. Whether you try Snyk or not, I encourage you to use security tools that are available to you. There's no reason to make things more difficult for yourself. And even taking a small step before taking another small step, before taking another small step, you're already ahead of where you were, right? And we really care about helping the community grow. So I'm going to share a few resources that we have to help you or your team learn about security, how to practice it, how to grow, how to up your security game. The first thing I want to plug is our vendor-neutral, education-focused security community. My team runs this community. We do it as part of our job for Snyk, but it is not Snyk branded. A lot of the content are from security people all over the industry, and we really want to help people learn and develop their security skills. So we launched the Secure Developer last year after building some momentum from our podcast of the same name, which is also a really good listen if you're curious about it. Every 2 weeks, we bring in someone from the industry for a webinar to discuss something security related. We also have a Slack community for those of you who may be interested in discussing security issues with others who are like-minded. I also included a link here to a series of cheat sheets that my team has produced. We have a number of actionable security advice for different languages and tools, and people found them really helpful. And these are just first steps, best practices that your team can take to help beef up your security. Most of these will be for the code that you write, right? Because we want to be secure about those too. But we also have best practices for a number of tools and workflows and that kind of thing. And this is a really great place to start if you're not sure what to give someone who's interested in security, right? And all of these, I'm going to tweet out these slides, and so all these links will be available to you, easy peasy. I also recommend our blog. We spend a lot of time writing security content, and it's a good, easy read if you're interested in that kind of thing. I mentioned earlier that our Goof apps are purposefully flawed, using old dependency apps. They are open source. They are public repos, and you can find them on GitHub, github.com/Snyk, S-N-Y-K. And I have a link directly to all the Goof repos on this slide as well. So I would encourage you to fork one of the repos, whichever best suits your tastes as far as languages or tools goes. And then I would encourage you to connect it to a Snyk account, which you can create at app.snyk.io. And you can select the repo from your GitHub, see all of those vulnerabilities, and try to exploit it for yourself. And if you do this, I'd love to hear about it. So please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. In closing, I just want to say thank you for being here. We're really excited to see people who are interested in security. You've been a really good audience. I also want to say that open source is awesome. It's great. It's great for business. It's great for community. But it's even more awesome when it's used thoughtfully and securely. So thank you so much. If you have any questions. does anyone have questions? I was also tasked with telling you that we are going to have lunch provided after this. So there's going to be barbecue in the room right out there. I think it sounded really good to me. But yeah, if there are no questions for the group, feel free to come up and say hi later. And yeah, thank you.